Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to read an article from Politico on most Europeans agree with Macron on China and United States report shows. And we're going to provide some commentary for this article. So it says Europeans want the continent to cut its independence on American security guarantees and invest in its own defensive capabilities. So, just right off the bat, I don't understand what nation, if you are an actual sovereign nation, would allow your military, your nation, to be dependent on another nation's military. If you want to be a sovereign nation, if you want to have the agency and autonomy to make your own decisions, you absolutely have to be in charge of your own security, or at least pit multiple different bigger powers against each other. Like a Switzerland, the reason it was able to stay neutral was because it, to a certain extent, pitted larger powers against each other throughout much of its history. So giving up your own security and having some other nation guarantee your security means you're not independent anymore. You're not able to make your own decision because you can be threatened at any time by the nation who is guaranteeing your security. And you see here it says close to 3/4 of Europeans, which is 74%, think the continent should cut. And I would say that's probably within the margin of error. I don't know the exact margin of error here, but I think it's fair to say 3/4 of Europeans, considering that's within the margin of error, think the continent should cut its military dependence on the United States and invest in its own defensive capabilities. A new report released Wednesday by the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR. Okay. The report, which is based on a poll with 16,168 respondents from 11 countries, that's a decent sample size, I would say, obviously. You typically need at least a few hundred for just questionnaire-based observational data to come to any decently solid conclusions. And when you're working with multiple different countries like this, 11 countries, then it does make sense to have at least a few hundred participants per country. And here you see a few thousand participants, at least 1,000 participants per country, probably. Also shows the majorities in every surveyed country want Europe to remain neutral in any conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan, in line with recent statements from French President Emmanuel Macron on the topic. Okay, so we've talked about this before, where the governments of various European powers are saying, we want to decouple with China, we want to de-risk from China, we want to be more antagonistic towards China. But then you see here, the vast majority of people within those countries actually don't want to come into conflict with China. They want to continue to collaborate, continue to have win-win situations with China. So you're seeing a complete disconnect between what people of supposedly democratic nations want and what their leaders are actually doing. In an interview with Politico in April, the French leader said, the great risk Europe faces is that it gets caught up in crises that are not ours. I don't know if that's the great risk. I mean, considering where the world wars occurred, they got caught up in crises that were of their own making. However, they cite Taiwan here, and that is completely fair. None of the win conditions, none of the objectives of European powers has anything to do with Taiwan. So why would European powers go across the entire world to the other side of the globe to harass China over wanting to integrate with Taiwan, a province of China? It just doesn't make any sense, any logical sense. Okay, so what is this saying? The great risk Europe faces is that it gets caught up in crises that are not ours, including Taiwan, preventing Europe from building its strategic autonomy. I don't know how that specifically would have to do with its strategic autonomy. Really, it just has to say no to America, adding that the continent should resist becoming America's follower. Okay, so that's kind of the direction they're going in. But that's really not the first time that they've just done whatever America says. So I don't know how this specifically would be related to their autonomy. They gave up their autonomy a long time ago, particularly whenever they gave up their own security capabilities. The chief takeaway from our survey is that Europeans want to see the EU become more self-reliant in foreign policy and build up its own defensive capabilities. Yeah, they've said that a number of times now. One of the report's authors said in a press release, Okay, so 43% of Europeans view China as a necessary partner, meaning they tend to agree with Macron's statement on China, while 35% see Beijing as a rival or an adversary to their country, the report says. I'd be interested to see which countries do actually consider China to be a rival because, I mean, they're competing for very different things. They don't really have, and I talk about wind conditions a lot. China has very different wind conditions from Europe. And so they're not really adversaries. They're not competing. It's just that Europe is declining. And so they're looking to point fingers at someone else. And they can't point the fingers at the true problem, which is the United States, because the United States controls the security of Europe. So they're just kind of doing what America says, and that's blaming China for their ailments when China just has nothing to do with Europe aside from creating win-win cooperation. However, the report shows that if Beijing decides to deliver ammunition and weapons to Russia, more Europeans than not, 41% versus 33%, would be ready to sanction China, even if that meant seriously damaging their own economy. So, I mean, not the first time that European countries were suicidal. They pretty much all became suicidal after they agreed to be subservient to the United States. I mean, look at the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. Respondents were also opposed to the prospect of Chinese ownership of key European infrastructure, such as bridges or ports, 65%, tech companies, 52%, and owning a newspaper in their country, 58%. Okay, so some of these things don't make sense. I can kind of see the argument for tech companies or newspapers. Okay, that makes sense. But why is it that 65% are not comfortable with bridges being controlled by China? I mean, you could always just take control of the bridges later on. If they build the bridges and they're doing something wrong, you can just nationalize the bridges. So, like, this just seems to be fear mongering of China here. And there's not really a good reason for it. I mean, China just likes to build things. United States has shown far more examples of building things and then screwing over their own populace. And it's also funny just to think about Europe here, because Europeans are the various colonial powers that colonized the vast majority of the world. And so for them to be like, oh, no, it's not good for other countries to control infrastructure within our country. I mean, that's like, well, that's what you did all across the entire world. So what do you expect at this point? I mean, maybe you could say, just trying to steelman their argument. Maybe you're saying, well, they recognize the problems of their colonial past, and so they want to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes that countries, unfortunately, were forced to make, which was giving up their infrastructure to the colonial power. So I don't know. That's kind of the most fair I can be in that regard, but I still think it's silly of them, especially when it comes to things like bridges. Top ally to Moscow, China has sought to present itself as a neutral middleman amid the war in Ukraine. But Western leaders have criticized Beijing's attempts, saying China had already picked sides in the conflict. China has also denied it was supplying weapons to Moscow, but a recent Politico investigation showed that Chinese companies, including one with government ties, had sent assault rifles, drone parts, and body armor to Russian entities. Okay, so, I mean, I don't understand why it wouldn't be fair if China agrees with why Russia is conducting the special military operation. Why would they not be allowed to send military equipment to Russia, considering the West is sending a ton of equipment and training the Ukrainians? So just consider, it just seems to be a double standard there, I would say. So this article is by Jacob Hanke-Vila and Nicholas Kamut, and it's from Politico. So if you liked my commentary on this article and want to hear more from me, please subscribe to our channel. If you like the article, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. And I'll leave a comment in the comment box with any questions, concerns, critiques. I love reading your comments. And thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.